In today's video, we're discussing Brock Boeser possibly ending up being on the Montreal Canadiens. What would a Canucks and Habs trade look like involving Boeser? We'll discuss that possibility. Plus, we also have some updated trade talk around the New Jersey Devils and what they may do closer to the NHL trade deadline. Certainly having a great season, likely going to be buyers this year. We have a very interesting name on NHL waivers. We have news on the next NHL Heritage Classic coming up in 2023. Several injury updates and more around NHL rosters and other news from around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we have a variety of news and some trade talk to take a look at. First up, news from the NHL waiver wire. We have 23-year-old Nashville Predators forward Eeli Tolvanen on waivers, and this is a player that just might get snagged by another NHL team. Now, of course, Tolvanen was a player who's a former first-round pick in 2017, came into the NHL with a very high profile, was dominating a lot of other leagues, playing overseas. He went to the World Championships, World Junior Championships, so he played on a variety of spots all 1 year. Came into Nashville with a lot of promise, a lot of potential. Kind of started slow. They gave him some time in the minors. He's been pretty well a full-time NHLer for a couple seasons now, and just is not putting up the production like this player was expected to be. He was expected to be an elite offensive talent, and he's just not quite living up to the expectations here so far. Now, in this year, he's appeared in 13 games, and he has 4 points so far. He has 51 career points in 135 career games. And like I said, he's still pretty young, so there's still lots of time here to maybe see if this player can get things going. Now, of course, Tolvanen still has one more year left on his contract, $1.45 million, which would be his qualifying offer as an RFA at the end of the deal. So certainly not a case where teams can take a flyer on a player in the final year of his contract and not worry about any future cap implications, you could say. But he would have that. But like I said, it's not a big cap hit, and he's young. So there's lots of teams out there that are rebuilding and might want to take a chance on this guy, whether it be a team like San Jose, Anaheim, Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo, like all kinds of these teams that might want to add another offensive weapon for free into their arsenal here. Now, I do have concerns, though, with the Predators. They're certainly not a team, in my opinion, that's built to be Stanley Cup contenders by any means. I'm not even sure they're going to be a playoff team this year, but I'm seeing what I'm going to call a disturbing pattern of lack of development with a lot of their top picks, because they certainly have a team that's for the most part driven by older veterans, and they have to look to mix in, like a lot of teams do, to mix in some youth with the vets so that they don't, at some point, don't need a complete tear down and rebuild. But a lot of their top young players are not really turning out. Dante Fabro is a prime example of that. Not to say that he's a bad player or anything, but he's not quite the level of defenseman they were hoping for when he was drafted, when had a couple of solid college seasons. It's been rumored before that he's certainly available for trade if the right offer came along. You had Tolvanen, who was never developed. They lost young goalie Connor Ingram on waivers earlier this year, who is still, in my opinion, a promising young goaltender. Philip Tomasino is a prime example. Last year, he was in the league full-time and actually had like a 30-plus point season. This year, he didn't even make the cut out of training camp and got sent to the American Hockey League, where he's putting up some decent numbers down there right now. And he's still young, so it's not the end of the world, but it just seems puzzling that he was good enough last year to be a full-time NHLer, have a decent rookie season, putting up over 30 points. And this year, it's not like the Preds really went out and added a bunch. And now he's not on the roster. Cody Glass, another young player who they picked up, obviously in that three-way deal between Vegas and Philly a couple seasons back. Still, he's a full-time NHLer technically, but he's been a healthy scratch a number of times. I think he's only appeared in 13 or 14 games, so he's basically a healthy scratch 50% of the season so far. So ultimately, they're not getting any real development or any much progress out of their young players. And isn't that kind of one of the main purposes they stuck with John Hines as a head coach, was that his ability to work with the younger players? So to me, this is a coaching and development issue. You can't tell me that all these prospects came in with all this potential and are not working out. It just seems like a disturbing trend, like I said, in the organization, that I think they really should focus on changing, because it could hurt them really badly long term if none of these players turn out to be good players for them. A few other news and notes from players going on injured reserve. The Buffalo Sabres have a few players, including Vinny Hinostroza and Henry Yokoharu, both placed in the IR, so they will be unavailable here for the next little while. The Montreal Canadiens yesterday activated Mike Hoffman. He was in their latest game, actually scored a goal, so he's officially back now for the Habs. The Washington Capitals added a couple players to IR after their last game, including goalie Darcy Kemper, as well as defenseman Alexander Alexiev. We also saw Magnus Hellberg in Detroit get called up, which is nice to see. Certainly Hellberg spent a long time bouncing around on waivers and went to Detroit and was able to go to the minor leagues on a conditioning stint. Now he's back. So certainly nice to see the call up, and I hope that he actually gets to play. He deserves an opportunity here somewheres, and hopefully he'll have his opportunity to stick in the NHL and show that he can contribute on a day-to-day basis and one of the top two goalie spots on whether it be Detroit or somewhere else's roster here in the near future. The Winnipeg Jets have also added a couple of players to IR, including Logan Stanley, who they just got back recently, didn't play long. Now he's back out again, and then Sami Manalainen as well, also out now on IR for Winnipeg as well. Another player who's going to be out, but not due to physical injury, is Predators forward Michael McCarron. Michael McCarron apparently has entered the NHL/NHLPA Player Assistance Program. So, of course, due to privacy, we don't know the reasons. That may or may not ever become public knowledge. It just depends on, I guess, what the player decides to reveal. But at this point, when players enter those programs, they're considered out indefinitely and will be only available back to the NHL team once the program coordinators that he's dealing with for whatever issue he's asking assistance for, once they clear him and say that he's able to resume normal playing activity. So we certainly wish our best wishes to Michael McCarron. Hopefully that, whatever he's battling, that he gets the help he needs and can return full-time in the not-too-distant future. We did get word on Hockey Night in Canada's 32 Thoughts segment last night on Hockey Night in Canada from Elliot Friedman that the next edition of the Canadian outdoor game, the Heritage Winter Classic, will be returning to Alberta and will be a Battle of Alberta between the Calgary Flames and the Edmonton Oilers. So, of course, the Battle of Alberta is typically always a fun game. To take it outdoors is certainly interesting and fun as well. They did note, though, that it's likely going to be in the early part of the season, most likely in October. So it won't be when things are, super frigid cold out there. There's certain parts of Alberta that get mighty chilly, especially into December and January and February. So I know the Winter Classic, or the Heritage Classic, that they had out in Edmonton quite a few years ago now, it was absolutely frigid. I believe it was the coldest outdoor game, at least one of the ones on record here. So it's nice to see them doing it a little bit earlier so people don't freeze and can enjoy the game a little bit more. Certainly want to send congratulations off to Detroit forward David Perron. That still seems weird to say, Detroit forward David Perron, considering how many times he's been a member of the St. Louis Blues and how long he's played there. It just doesn't quite feel right that he's not with St. Louis anymore, but he played in game number 1,000 yesterday for the Detroit Red Wings. Unfortunately for the Wings, they did end up losing in overtime, but David Perron did score a goal and had himself a good game for game 1,000. He's certainly still not slowing down by the looks of things. And with the direction of the Blues this year, I do think his departure is not you can't put it all on that by any means, but certainly has played a role. I think his contributions are noticing that it's not there, and even the impact on Ryan O'Reilly, in my opinion, who he played with for a long time, certainly impactful there as well, not having that chemistry that they were able to use here for the last few years in St. Louis. The NHL Board of Governors meetings are also taking place here in Florida as well, and certainly the biggest topic by any means that everybody's watching and waiting for more information on is the salary cap and whether or not it's going to be going up more, and it probably won't be a firm answer here as of yet, but it is something that's going to be discussed and will be one of the main topics asked by reporters to Gary Bettman and Bill Daly once they do their media availability. There's obviously a guarantee of $1 million increase for sure, but there is possibility it could go up more. There's some that think in the NHL executive world that we could see an increase of maybe $3 or $4 million next season. There's some talk that it could be $1 million, followed by a season of $4 and $5 million gains. And Friedman was talking about the fact that they may take a look at that and say, well, if it's going to go up $10 million over the next 3 years, for example, is what we're projecting, maybe we could forecast that out and kind of spread it out a little bit better and just do an even stretch of maybe $3 million or maybe 3.5 or something to that effect over the next 3 years instead, to kind of give teams a little bit more breathing room so they can get out of their cap situations and, be as competitive as possible. On the NHL trade rumor circles, I do want to take a look at the New Jersey Devils. The latest article from Larry Brooks, who does talk a lot about the New York Rangers, but does talk about the other New York area teams, including the Devils as well. Feels like the Devils are going to be a prime-time team to watch near the deadline. Of course, they're having a good season and near the top of the NHL, and general manager Tom Fitzgerald likely going to want to reward his team with some late-season additions to give them as much ammunition as possible to not only, have a good regular season, but make sure they're prepped and ready to make a run here for the playoffs. The last time the Devils had a big surge in the regular season, of course, was the year that Taylor Hall was the Hart Trophy winner, MVP, and unfortunately they had not a good run in the playoffs. They were out very quickly first round, and they haven't really been back since. So obviously they want to make the most of this opportunity. I'm sure the Devils feel that this is not a fluky type of season and that they're going to be able to continue to sustain this type of play in results and be a continuous playoff team for the foreseeable future here. But I'm sure once they're going to be back in it, that Fitzgerald's going to want to make some moves. Now, a couple of names that you could watch that could be moved according to Brooks, and I don't entirely disagree with here, would be guys like possibly Alexander Holtz, which is not a given that they would move him, but I think they might in the right deal. A guy like Damon Severson, which I know some Devils fans have debated with me on this channel as well, that he's not going anywhere. This is what a lot of fans like to say, and I'm sorry, I don't see a future for Severson in New Jersey, given what they already have on the blue line, plus the guys they have coming, like the couple of guys like Luke Hughes and Simon Nemec, who I'm sure they would consider to be untouchables in any kind of a trade, are going to be looking for spots here in the next season or so. So to me, it doesn't make sense for them to re-sign Severson for any kind of longer-term deal when they already have another group of veterans around him, plus these young guys coming. But another name to watch in New Jersey as well might be Shea Casey, of course, is another interesting prospect D as well. So certainly, when you get a pretty deep prospect pool, there's one or two that's going to probably be willing to move. You throw in a possibility of a draft pick in there as well, maybe something off the roster like Severson. They could make a pretty good run here at a pretty interesting higher end player should they decide to enter the buyer's market, which I do suspect that they will likely be involved in later in the season. Now, in Vancouver, I want to talk about a couple of possibilities, but first off, let's address Luke Schenn. Luke Schenn is a defenseman for Vancouver who I know there's a debate going on in the Canucks fan base about whether or not he'll be re-signed or not. Even Vancouver media has been over this one as well. And in my opinion, Luke Schenn is almost definitely going to be traded. A couple of reasons why is that there's going to be a big market for him, and I see teams offering more than Vancouver can, say no to. At the end of the day, they could still re-sign him as a free agent next year in the offseason and bring him back. That's a real possibility. But for the run for the playoffs, which at this point is not looking like Vancouver's going to be a part of, I know Bruce Boudreau and some of his players are trying their best to put up a fight to make sure that they're in the mix, and maybe they will be, but right now all signs point to the indication that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin are likely going to be making some trades and don't believe this team can contend regardless of where they sit. And of course, like I said, Luke Schenn's going to have a pretty good market. There's lots of things to like here. For one, it's an expiring deal, so there's no longer-term attachment. Number two, the guy is an experienced defenseman, been around the league a long time. He's an absolute warrior, will play through a lot, very physical, one of the all-time leaders in hits, multiple-time Stanley Cup champions, good character in the dressing room, good leader. There's just so many intangibles, as well as the physical play on the ice, and the fact that he can play top 4 minutes if you need him to. He can be, on a deeper team. He can play a third-pair role, and he can fit in just fine. Look what he did in Tampa. It was more of a lower-profile role, but he served it, and he served it very well. Goes on to other teams like Vancouver, and he's able to play some more minutes in a different situation, and he can handle that. So to me, I think teams are going to pay a pretty price here to have that on their roster at the deadline, and I don't think the Vancouver Canucks are going to be able to say no to what's being offered. So to me, Schenn absolutely should be likely traded by Vancouver because of the offers. But secondly, Brock Boeser, could he end up in Montreal? I know this is a topic that we've discussed for a few different options, a few different teams and writers looking at the possibilities here. But Rick Dhaliwal, Vancouver media, an NHL insider, talked about the fact that he feels that the Montreal Canadiens might be one of the teams where he could end up going. After all, it's saying that there's a long-standing interest in Boeser from the Habs. Now, of course, keep in mind their new regime here of Kent Hughes, of course, as the general manager, and Jeff Gorton as the executive vice president. A lot of that happened before their time, but it doesn't mean that there isn't enough other people still within the organization that might mention this name and recommend that they really consider doing it. A couple of things to look at here is the fact that Montreal does need a few more players I think that they can look at for the future part of this team. They have a lot of forwards they want to shed and move on from, and Boeser might be part of the solution moving forward. Now, one thing to caution you, though, is that they are in a tight cap situation, and they do need to re-sign your top young goal scorer, Cole Caulfield, who's going to be demanding a pretty substantial raise, and I'm sure they're going to want to lock him up, hopefully on an 8-year deal. They may not get 8 years. Hard to say what kind of bargain he's going to want and what kind of deal he wants, but I'm sure Montreal's preference will be to go as long as possible and to lock him up and make him a big part of the future as well. But at the same time, they have that to contend with. But Dhaliwal also says that Vancouver will likely have interest in Sean Monahan, who's on an expiring deal as a centerman, having a comeback, resurgent type season after a couple of down years in Calgary. But of course, a lot of that was due to injury. He's a lot healthier now and certainly able to contribute at a better level. And if they trade Bo Horvat later this season, they're going to want a centerman to kind of replace that depth in the system that's going to be missing. Now, of course, we don't know what's coming back in any kind of a Horvat deal either. The solution may already be in front of them in that scenario. However, Monahan's not going to give you the production or Horvat will. They know that, but still Monahan might be a cheaper option for them to re-sign as a pending UFA if he goes to Vancouver at the end of the year and likes it there. Maybe they have a best chance to sign him as a pending UFA to an extension, and they could probably get him on a much cheaper deal than they would have ended up paying Horvat anyway. And of course, like I said, but you're going to get a very different player, very different production. I don't think they would see Monahan as a Horvat replacement, but they might see Monahan as a good third-line player and just to kind of replace some of that depth while they try to figure things out for their top six moving forward. So it doesn't mean it would be 1-for-1. I don't think it would be Boeser for Monahan 1-for-1. That's not where this is going. I don't think that's what Dhaliwal was referring to as well with his comments on the situation as well. But Monahan could be the roster player coming back from Montreal in a Bo Horvat or Brock Boeser, type of trade going to Montreal. Like I said, they do have a lot of other younger prospects and young players that are already getting some NHL experience now, plus several draft picks that could be part of the package as well. I'm sure Vancouver would likely, they really need more help on the blue line for the future, and Montreal has a lot of that to offer. So not only could Monahan be the roster player going back to help replace that depth up front now between Boeser and Horvat likely going out, but they could probably get a piece or two for the future as well out of Montreal since they have so many interesting prospects to consider, plus some draft currency. But it's really difficult to say if Ken Hughes and Jeff Gorton feel the same way about Boeser that the previous regime and Marc Bergevin did. There was also talk from Dhaliwal that Marc Bergevin had made a trade offer to Jim Benning when they were both running their respective franchises that included Alexander Romanov and a draft pick going to Vancouver in exchange for Brock Boeser, and Montreal was going to be willing to take one of their unfavorable contracts back as well. Of course, this was prior to the Canucks making that trade with the Coyotes for Garland and Ekman-Larsson, where they shedded all those bad contracts of Roussel, as well as Jay Beagle and Louis Eriksson. The Canadiens were willing to take one of those back along with Boeser for Romanov and a pick. So to me, Benning probably should have made that deal, but he did not. He refused the trade. Never happened. And here we are. Of course, Romanov was later traded by the new regime in Montreal anyway to the New York Islanders. And, well, things are certainly different now than they could have been had that trade been consummated. But let me know your thoughts and everything discussed here today down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.